Good afternoon. Welcome to our monthly Dalim tips and tricks session. If you signed up last month, you may have discovered that there wasn't one. Basically, we couldn't figure out the who, what, where, and how, but we got things squared away now. This month's webinar deals with working with a file system on ES. And since I had an extra month, there's two possibilities. This will either be the greatest presentation ever because I've really got it fine-tuned, or, you know, if you leave a pile of garbage out for a month, after a month, it smells really bad. So let's see what we end up with, enlightenment or intense odor. If you've been on these webinars before, and I think most of the guys on here have been, you know, you got the little Zoom thing in the go to meeting or go to webinar. To fit that thing on your screen, there should be a questions panel. So you can drop those to us. We usually answer them at the end. But if the guys monitoring it feel it's appropriate to jump in the middle, we'll do that. That's not a problem. Sometimes that's the better way to go.
And somebody posted that there's no sound for some reason, although I hear you. So let me make sure they do have sound now.
No sound, but you hear me.
I hear you. I'm thinking it's fine. It might just be there. Oh, yeah, Pete just replied. He's got sound. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so let's get started. You know, I think there's a fair mix of our customers who already use ESFS volumes, and I'm pretty sure that we did a webinar on it a few years ago. But we thought maybe it would be useful to do another one because things have changed over the last couple of years. There's some newer options, a little more flexibility on how they get managed, and different types of ESFS mounts that are now available. And so we're going to go over a lot of the basics on setting it up. What you'll see on my ES servers, I actually have 5 different file system volumes, and they're all different flavors. So you will hopefully get a range of how you set these things up and how they behave, because there are implications for what you're going to see them do and how you're going to see them do it based on how they set up and what type of volume they are. Those who use the ESFS volumes are probably already familiar with how you manage them and control permissions, but we'll go over that. We'll jump through it because there are different ways to deal with these at a high level, and then you can get very granular on how you control who can see them and what they can do. I've often thought that the file system volumes are, in a sense, a pseudo hot folder because you can attach different workflows, templates, and smart views to them. We'll go over that. And I suspect we're going to spend a lot of the time on file monitoring and how that behaves, again, based on file system type. These are the 5 different variants we're going to look at. Typically, the easiest way to deal with the ESFS is just direct attached storage with the file monitoring on either the app server or renderer doing the dirty work for you. What's known as an ESFS satellite, which is a completely separate server with storage, but that is able to notify ES because you've got the JDF device utilities. We'll look at Amazon S3, and I think the SFTP volumes is fairly new. And, you know, some people just want to get away with trying to do NFS mounts or Samba mounts, and you can do it, but as that last bullet says, there are file monitoring implications for both of those types. So let's stop looking at Keynote and look at ES instead. We're going to first just go over what I've got set up on this server here. Let's go to our volumes. And you see, here's my 5 ESFS volumes. Local, if you haven't ever done these things, you have to call out a host that is going to basically monitor and manage that volume. This is just attached storage, and whenever you set one of these things up, you're going to assign to it a project template, and as we know, a project template can contain an ES workflow and any approval logic that may be associated with it. A smart view also has to be assigned. And one of the things that takes a little while to get used to with the file system volumes is that they are totally smart view dependent. So if you see something on your mounted volume in ES, again, I don't know, that doesn't look right to me. Either you have the wrong smart view assigned, or the one you have assigned maybe needs to get edited or massaged per your taste. This guy here is probably the most vexing in general, and that is being able to monitor your file system volume. For a local attached storage like this, you're going to turn that on, and you're probably going to be pretty happy because the file system monitor built into ES is going to do the dirty work for you, and you're going to be pretty happy. If you want to revision files, you turn that guy on, and one of the other interesting aspects of the ESFS volumes, and I think this came in with ES5, is that if you're doing some metadata tagging for files that are on any ESFS volume, that metadata will automatically get injected directly into the file. And this is as opposed to simply metadata being associated with file based on the ES database and how we track metadata, but this truly inserts it into the file. So that's a very handy feature to have. The other thing I'll mention is that when you initially create the volume, you can start defining your access rights right from this screen. So if I decided, right at the beginning, this volume is only going to be associated with, maybe this customer, I can do that right up front. But I think in general, unless you know for sure when you are creating this volume that, it's truly only going to be limited to select org or customer, you're probably better off having a more open-ended access rights at the beginning, and then start using some of the other tools I'll show you in a bit to start narrowing down based on org, customer, users, or groups to see who's going to be able to mess with it. So this guy is going to be pretty much wide open. Real quickly, to kind of show you the other things we're going to look at. This is an NFS mounted volume that we're going to look at. Notice that monitoring is turned off. The reason it's turned off is there's no way to monitor it. File system monitoring is dependent on being able to identify events on the file system. And a network mounted volume is not something that we can detect that on. But as you'll see as we get in here, there are other ways to deal with it. Notice here the type. This is an SSH FTP. I mean, the terminology, frankly, seems a little odd to me. It's basically an SFTP mount. And so this is actually connecting to a different server here. And actually, I see that I turned monitoring on that. That's really not appropriate. He's, again, an instance in which we can't monitor file system activity. This is an Amazon S3 volume, which we now support. And if you look when you're creating any new volume, here's your types. File will be local detached storage or any sort of network mount. That's an S3, and this is the SFTP one you just saw me do. We could probably do an entire webinar on the S3 storage, but we're not doing that right now. You have to, when you define a bucket in S3, the server is pointing to my bucket name, and you're going to get credentials from S3. And in fact, if I hit the choose button here, the fact that it is showing to me some different paths and folders that I may want to watch, that's typically an indication that I am hitting S3 properly, and we're going to be able to work with it. Again, I have monitoring turned off. If you talk to Dalim, the monitoring for an S3 volume is something we should be able to do. Currently, Fred is still barely alive from working with that, but we suggest not turning that on, but there are other alternatives on how to get that to work. And lastly, this is what we call an ES satellite server. Notice my host is a completely different host than this web service, which is my local ES server. This is a different Linux server that has the JDF device utilities running on it. The advantage of the satellite server is that since those JDF utilities are running, I can do monitoring because the file system monitor is able to report to the ES app server what's going on. And so then it can automatically see if new files have come in and alert us to them. So once that's all done, we look here, and indeed, here's all my goodies. I'm browsing my local file system, and once you get these things up and you start looking at them, it's really no different than any other instance in ES. I'm viewing a smart view, and I got all my different actions and options here. Again, dependent on how the smart view is set up. SFTP, that's my NFS mount, and so forth. So let's look at a couple things in terms of how managing access to a volume. Let's go to the crudest way to do it. Let's go to one of our customers. Go to Los Pollos Hermanos. And we don't want to be there, we want to be over here. Let's say there's a volume that we want to be able to see, but we want to restrict access for certain folders. So for instance, this is my local ESFS volume. Let's say we don't want anybody from this customer to be able to see that folder. And let's say we don't want them to see the miscellaneous folder either. Yeah, let's see if it's going to let me do that. No, it's not. Yeah, we'll just have to go with what we got. Let's find a user inside of here. Let's go with Walter White, right? So let's say he decides to log in. At the top level, he should have the ability to see that local file system. But if notice he can't change the settings on it though. But if he drills down, you'll notice that folder, what's called More Borrego, doesn't show up for him. And it shouldn't. He's a member of a customer that is restricted. But let's try something a little different. Here's Gus Fring. He is also a member of the Los Pollos Hermanos customer. He's going to try to do the same thing. He's going to go to that local file system. But notice he sees that folder that we supposedly restricted him from seeing. So the question is, why can he see it when he's a customer? I mean, he's a member of a customer that shouldn't be able to see it. And this is where you get into the more granular approach to controlling access. Now, frankly, this is a strangely named option that they have in your admin area. This is something called production parameter, which could probably mean anything. But what it actually deals with is controlling access to your file systems. And not only per volume, but per folder. And notice the folder that we restricted the Los Pollos Hermanos from seeing actually has Gus defined as an acceptable user, but notice he's read-only. That's why we got that forbidden function thing when we logged in earlier. So you can see that the settings in the customer come first, but when you drill down and start managing these folders through this production parameter, these settings trump what was in the customer setting. And you can do kind of the inverse of this sort of thing, because let's look at, let's go back into that customer. I think I have a group defined in here. Yeah, that's the Breaking Bad group, right? So these are the members of it, but notice that Tuco is not in there. If you know Breaking Bad, he's a very dangerous person. So let's say that instead of restricting the entire customer, we want to let everybody be able to see it except Tuco. Well, I suppose you could go in here and start entering in a user at a time, but if you got a whole bunch of users, who wants to do that? So why not just allow the group to get access? So now the Breaking Bad group has access, but we will assume that still excludes Tuco from being able to get in. So again, the folder we're interested in was called More Borrego. Here he comes, and he can't see it. The only other thing I want to mention on access permissions, and I should have kept this in earlier. Let's go back to the way we were initially set up. Let's say any member of this group has read-only access. So what does that actually mean? What are the implications of having only read access to a file system? Let's get in as Gus again. Yeah, we'll go to that semi-restricted folder. Let's say Gus decides he wants to delete that file. You can see in our Smart View, we do have the delete button, and it lets him hit it, but he can't delete the file. That's a good thing. Let's say he decides he wants to upload a file. Can't do that. Write access is forbidden. One would hope he could view a file because he has read permissions, and he can. And you'll see the same thing if he tried to say access a folder, another folder that did have access, and try to drag a file in here. Let's give it a go. Let's see if he has success. Nope, can't do it. So you can see that you can not only control what they can see, but how they see it or interact with it. At the top level, in terms of controlling an ESFS volume or folder, this is an important concept to know too. We'll keep dealing with this one because I got a lot of folders in it. Top level of this volume. Initially, this inherits the settings that were defined when we set up the volume. So the top level inherits that unless we say different, every subfolder will inherit the settings from the top level. But let's say we don't want to go that way, because let's look at the miscellaneous folder. Everybody can see them, and it's got this damn advanced Smart View. But let's say we have another folder that we want to use a different Smart View. So within the same volume, you can mix and match different Smart Views if, say, the people who deal with this folder and the files that go in it don't like the Smart View that is assigned at the top level. So for instance, if we go back, this guy, you'll notice he's got some user filters up top. Notice how the information is displayed in the gallery view. whereas this guy has a much more stripped down smart view, and again, he doesn't show any user filters. One thing that I think can be a bit frustrating, but I think there might be a pretty good reason for it, is within the file system view itself, you can still click the settings and you can go in and start changing the template properties. So you could change, for instance, which workflow it runs when the files come in, or maybe just change the template. But you'll notice you cannot change the smart view from here. So if you get into a situation where you do want to do some sort of manipulation along those lines, the only way you're going to be able to do it is to go back to the production parameter area and start messing around with your smart view selection here. And again, if you choose to, you can run different workflows or project templates from there. One thing that I really forgot to show straight at the beginning was the connection between what we would consider to be normal file systems and what shows in ES. Let's go to one of my volumes and let's kind of scooch this guy over and get this guy over here. Let's try this split screen view in OS 10. Yeah, it's crap. That's what I figured. We'll just do it manually. We want to look at this guy. It's an NFS mount over to another Linux server. And as it should, the folders we see here mimic the folders that we see here. The files that we see here mimic the files that we see in here. Makes sense. So we then will ask ourselves, what would happen? In fact, let's not do that. Let's do it from this folder. This is a better one. This is a better way to show this. This is a SFTP volume that's going over to another Mac. So we are here viewing that main folder. Notice that the folder we're looking at has both JPEGs and RAW files in it. But in the file system view, the RAW files aren't showing up. So the question is why? When you first define your volumes, there's this file exclusion regular expression you can put in. So in this case, I told it, I don't want any of them raw files showing up. I just want to see my JPEGs. And you can put in much more complex regular expressions in here, because if there was other files, I could just make that an OR regular expression and just string a whole bunch of different extensions in there that maybe I'm not interested in seeing. And as we just saw, those guys are not showing up in here. So let's say we decide we want to throw a couple new files in here. And I got my duck here. We're going to throw the duck inside of here. Oh, the duck is already there. All right, we better get something else. Let's get the Oregon trip. I think that's when I went to Oregon. So one thing that I was blabbing about earlier was the fact that this volume, these SFTP volumes, have no way to do monitoring. And so we now sit here and we say, well, gee, I threw them files in here. How come they don't show up? And isn't there some way to get them to show up? Or am I reduced to having to stand here, all day? Or if you've ever dealt with the file system volumes, the manual method to deal with this is you actually have to expand the folder and get it to show up. Now, this file should be appearing for me in a second because I actually have a little script running in the background that should kick in here any second. That's the problem with these cron jobs. There we go. Notice how the Oregon trip just showed up. So your question may be, how did this file appear when we're not doing any file system monitoring? So let's dig a little deeper into this. In fact, I'm going to go to, there's another subfolder. We're going to go into the junk folder because this is an easier one to deal with because there's currently nothing in it. So let's go down a level into the junk. And I'm going to grab, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4 files. Throw them in there. Now, anyone who's dealt with the ESFS volumes in the past, especially in the earlier days, they have seen this instance where they throw the stuff in there, they sit there, they get mad, and then they expand the folder and they see these files listed in italics. The files listed in italics means ES sees the files, but it hasn't ingested them yet. However, the act of expanding the folder forced ES to reread that folder, and then you see how it's ingesting. But we know anyone who's ever dealt with that routine quickly gets a bit ticked off because you can't spend all day manually expanding folders to force the stuff to come in. That's just fairly stupid. And again, I want to point out that this is only the case with network mounted volumes like NFS or SMB, and this one's in SFTP volume. So how can we get this thing to work kind of sort of the way we want it to work? Well, let's do this. Yeah, there's the junk folder. I guess I missed that one file, so let's delete him. I'm going to throw a bucket of files in there again. I don't know where he came from, but we'll just ignore him. There's a bunch of files. So I need a way to expand the folder without having somebody sitting around expanding the folder every day. And that's where the API can come into play. I'm going to run an API command. We're not going to dissect it quite yet. And let me go to terminal. Let's see, let's just throw it in here. Yeah. No, that's not where I want to run it. There we go. Let's look at ES. What I just did was the equivalent of opening that folder and peeking inside and forcing ES to acknowledge that there's files inside. What we ran here is the production.list method of the API. And more specifically, if you look at what we got here, I had previously identified the ID of that folder. So I specifically targeted it at that folder and told it to run production.list. And again, that is the equivalent of a person expanding that little folder. Now, this has limited utility. The reason being is that, you know, we've got a whole volume here, or a whole folder with subfolders in it, right? This routine will only work for the specific folder you pointed at. So it's not able to step down the entire folder structure and update everything in it. So unless you're dumping everything in a common folder and then run that routine, yeah, I run it with a cron job usually. I don't just throw it in the terminal as you saw me do there. But you know, unless it's only one folder, it's not going to do the job for you. So we have to come up with a better way, or another way if we need it, if we wanted to work in a more realistic sense. So this is the one we were looking at earlier. This is an NFS mount that's running over on my Linux server. We were looking at this one a little while ago, I think. Now let's pick a folder. We'll go into the outdoors folder. And let's get over to this machine. Before I throw anything in the folder, I thought I had that thing. Oh, that's my cron job right there. Let's watch what this thing does. This is a PHP script. And what you do with this thing is you point it at a specific volume that ES is watching, and you can see what it did is it stepped through all the folders, and it basically, again, ran that production list and listed out all the files. Now, nothing new was in there, but if I were to, see if I get my mouse right, we're in the outdoors folder, right? Let's go to the data drive. My mount here is quite slow, so hopefully I won't get any failed copies here. Yeah, see, I got the beach ball of death going on here. There we go. So we're probably best served by not dumping in a voluminous number of files. Let's just grab, in fact, let's be real cheesy about it. We'll just start with this one. So again, since this is an NFS mounted volume and there's no file monitoring going on, that EV file isn't going to show up. However, we got lucky because the cron job runs the script every 2 minutes. So it must have just run, a couple seconds after I dumped that file in. And I'm probably getting a little repetitive here, but again, this mini mount, NFS mount, is a file system with monitoring turned off. So what saved the day for us there was this PHP script that steps the folder structure and gives us what we want. We'll real quickly, we're not going to go through the whole thing because the main thing I want to point out in this script, hopefully you can see it. Let me see if I can blow up the text a little. Maybe that looks a little better. This is the name of our ESFS volume that we defined within the GUI, within ES. This is the name of the local drive that we're actually targeting. In essence, this guy is truly this on the local machine. For this routine to work, you have to have PHP running on your machine, and the script must run on the server that the file system actually exists on. You can't run it from the app server. And I think, in general, I'm not sure how often you're going to run into a situation where you have to do this. But, if you do want to go with just network mounted volumes and, you don't want to have to run the JDF device on a machine, and we have to be frank, if you have a Windows server, the Dalim's JDF utilities for doing file monitoring do not work currently on a Windows machine. You can load those on there and it will present the files to you through an ESF volume, but the monitoring piece does not work on Windows. So if you are sharing from a Windows server, this might be the only alternative for you. Now, I was going to show you a real whiz-bang thing here on my S3 volume of how we can get it to work with file monitoring with monitoring turned off. But unfortunately, my setting decided not to behave this morning, but I'm going to attempt to explain the approach because I know that this works, and I know Fred currently has it set up on a customer server, and it does work. Here's the challenge. If we talk about that PHP script we just ran, as I mentioned, it has to run on our local server. Well, if we've got an S3 volume, I'm not going to chuck that thing up on S3 and get it to run. But there is another solution. And that solution is something that they refer to as an S3 gateway. S3 gateway is essentially a middleman between not only ES, but between any server and the actual S3 buckets that you're working with. So what we're able to do, and the way I had it implemented, and I did have this working, is I have a EC2 instance. So this is basically a VM that you spin up, and the VM is associated with, in my case, it's associated with this S3 bucket that I have. So you say, well, so what? How does that help you any? Well, that EC2 instance can export out an NFS share. And in fact, if I look here, let's clear all that and blow it up a bit. This guy right here, that is a mount to that EC2 VM. And what we should be able to do is, if we run that PHP script and we monitor this mount essentially mirrors what's in our S3 bucket. So as files go into S3, they are mirrored here, and we could then get ES to update what it sees in that folder, and we're essentially doing file monitoring without the monitoring on an S3 volume. If I go here, and we go in here, oops, and let's pick a folder. Let's pick the images folder. So if you look at those files, the prospector and these 8118 things, whatever those happen to be, those are the same files that we see in here. There's this prospector, there's those 818 thing guys. So we're able, and I'm probably not explaining this well. I suspect, you know, after everyone's bamboozled, Fred will come in and answer your questions in a more coherent fashion.
You're doing fine.
When we're done. And I think we would be better served if this thing was still working for me, because we tested this yesterday and it worked perfectly. But this morning, the EC2 instance apparently is no longer syncing with my S3 bucket. So something went awry. I will mention, though, that the way that I know Fred has implemented in the past was he actually has a network appliance that he works with, and you load, there's an image you get from Amazon that is basically a VM image that you run up. And so that local appliance essentially serves as the middleman between your S3 storage and, in our case, the ES server. So that, again, we deal with an NFS mount to the appliance. but the appliance is essentially mirroring or syncing with S3 for us. So he does the dirty work. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I thought that you think you explained it well.
Boy, I feel like I've been talking 100 miles an hour. I'm not sure I really got to everything. I should probably stop and answer any questions at this point.
All right, let's see what we got. Somebody is asking if they can get a copy of the script that you're running.
Yes, and in addition to providing the script, there's a how-to from Dalim that talks about some of the particulars in terms of how to point it to the volumes, and because you can have it pointed to multiple volumes. If you look at how I did it, since I was being a little lazy, let's go back here. Excuse me. I had it pointed to just this one volume, but if I had multiple volumes on here, I could have a whole list of them down here and it would span through all of them. And from what I've noticed in working with it, especially if you really start getting a lot of files in it, it does not go instantaneously. So if you're scheduling this with a cron job, I certainly wouldn't run it every minute like I've been doing it. You probably might want to run it every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes. And then you have to deal with impatient operators who dump the file in and they don't see it 10 seconds later, so they start yelling at you. But that's the trade-off that you have to accept when you're doing it this way.
And you can obviously, like if you're running this from Twist, if Twist tends to be what you're using to place things on your file system, you could run that in a set param from RE or what's the merge tool and run the script specifically to the directory that the transmit tool is putting files in. There's a number of ways to do it, but it helps for that. So you can basically park a file on there and tell it, okay, ES, go look at the file right here.
Since it is a PHP script, you have to make sure you have Apache running on the server. I had this working the other day, and then after I rebooted my machine, I couldn't get it to work and realized I had not restarted Apache. So that's a gotcha. And like I said, you do have to have PHP installed.
All right. Another question is somebody wants to see, I think they're talking about in your ESFS setup, how do you limit it to only one specific file type to watch instead of having to put all the different ones you don't want, I guess.
Oh, instead of doing an exclude.
Instead of doing an exclude, just do a minimum include.
Let's see, where is it? I'm looking. It's right here. File regular expression, this guy. That is who it basically allows.
Yep.
Pretty sure that's.
And as you can see above that, you can exclude or include even specific folders by regular expression.
Exactly. And one other thing I should point out, because I think I forgot to mention this earlier. I mean, a lot of times if you see some of these file system demonstrations, they basically look like people dumped a lot of images in and they just made previews of them and that's it. And that is a very bad notion to come away from. Or if you come away from this with that kind of thing in your mind, then we've done a bad job. Any file system volume can have as complicated an ES workflow as you want to build, as long as you point the either a template to it or specifically assign the workflow to it. You can run anything in there that you could run on a project. And I had this in my notes, but I forgot to mention it. This is, I think we have a couple of customers who do this sort of thing. If you're dumping files into your file system, think I got some PDFs in here. Yeah, I don't think I got any photos. But, you know, let's say you just have people, you know, some people just like to organize things on a RAID or in a folder structure. They have all the files for a job. Maybe they, you know, they bust them apart and organize. But when they're done, they now want to create a quote unquote normal ES project. If you right click on a folder, you have this option, create project from this folder. You tell it where you want it to go. So I'm going to put it in Acme, and I've got a, what is this thing called? Two-step approval thing. And I say save. And what can be a bit disconcerting if you're, you know, if you're used to looking at how the file system looks, you know, you're used to it looking like a smart view, right? There's the smart view, there's a smart view. Then all of a sudden you click this thing and it looks like a project. Well, it's because it is a project. And if I go up to that customer, if I go to Acme, there's the project that just got generated off the file system. There's the PDFs that were sitting in the PDF folder. And doing that makes sense to me. I'm not sure I understand why you would want to do this, but you know, I'm a limited kind of person. You can then go to that project and turn it back into a folder if that's what floats your boat. And there it is. You see the smart view again. So I just turned it back into a normal file system volume or file system folder.
All right. Let's see. The last question.
Noting that.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut in there. It's interesting to note that that is a limitation if you use file systems and you use web users. We've seen in the past, I don't think it's been fixed, but web users don't have the ability to see projects that are stored on the file system. So one thing to keep in mind if you use web users with your file system.
Right. Good point. And the last question we have, and I'm not sure if you have anything ready to show for this, Mike, or if you're set up this way, but someone's asking how to make revisions work on a file system, which I guess the question is because
well,
it doesn't work like it does for a project.
Sure. Well, here, the thing you have to remember is that file system is a file system, right? So if I have, there's that there file. If I throw another file into that folder with the same name, what's going to happen? It's going to overwrite it, correct? So how do we get around it? When you create any file system, it creates an associated input channel. You'll see these are basically all those guys we've been messing with. A couple of them have monitoring turned on, some of them have it turned off. And associated with any input channel, we're used to seeing an input rule, which I do have. So this file monitor input rule, you know, there's a default way it behaves, but there's other ways you can do it. Normally, to get revisioning to work on a file system per default, we usually have it work where you actually have to name it with an _R and then a number. So let's give it a go. First, I'm gonna have to be able to find one of these files so I can revision that bad boy. Let's find, let's get one in here. We'll do it this way. We'll just do complete cheating on it. Let's just find a file. We'll get this one. And let's download them. Assuming I have a download here. Boy, that's bad. How about this one? Who would have thought I don't have a download there? Download. All right, here we go. Gee, I wonder what I should name it. We'll call it greenery _R1. Fair enough. Let's copy it. And I think I have that volume mounted. Yeah. So what will happen? Throw it there. And let's see, I'm not sure if I have the revision number thing. Oh, here he comes. 2-2. Now, I think my input rule is, my rule set is probably incorrect because normally you don't want it to show the underscore R1. We usually have it set so it still just shows the initial base name and not that. So I think my rule is wrong, but you can see it did revision the file. And I should be able to do this.
I was saying, Mike, that's actually the path to the file, so it's not file name.
Oh, you're right. That's just my path. That's right. I don't have the, I'm not actually looking at the name. Good point. So that's just a smart view issue.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you upload through the interface, ES takes care of it for you. It actually makes the R1, R2, R3 if you're uploading just through the interface. But if you're doing it from a file system standpoint, or Twist is putting files there, you have to be able to take into account the revision counting. So if you're automating it, you need something to look in the folder, see how many revisions exist, and then increment it one and drop it in there. Or
yeah, I mean, as Fred said, let's say I'm just straight uploading it. I didn't change the name, but doing it this way, we don't have to monkey around with any of that stuff. And you can see it automatically revisioned it for us.
And that's it, Mike.
In general, I think people who are dealing with a file system, I'm not sure how often people do it that way, but there's no reason you can't.
All right, that's all the questions.
Is that all the questions? Well, I hope it wasn't the smelly garbage pile that I mentioned earlier. And if you have any further questions, let us know. And I don't know if I still have that keynote thing hanging around because you always have to show, the last page here. We got these things every month. Third Wednesday of the month, I think, is what it is. And I think Alex is probably going to have something sensational for you next month. And so now he's got to deliver because we advertised it that way.
Absolutely.
Thanks for attending.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.